August 15th, 1945, 11:47 at night. The radio room at Camp Carson POW facility in Colorado Springs was supposed to be locked. Instead, Corporal Daniel Reeves stood in the doorway watching a Japanese prisoner, technically an enemy of the United States, hunched over a disassembled shortwave receiver with a soldering iron in one hand and wire cutters in the other. Outside, the August night was cool at 6,000 feet elevation, the air thin and clean with that particular clarity that comes from mountain altitude. Inside the small concrete room, it smelled of hot metal, old tobacco smoke, and the acrid scent of flux from soldering work. The only light came from a single bulb hanging from the ceiling and the orange glow of the soldering iron. Sergeant Kenzo Fujimoto was 32 years old, slight of build, with the careful hands of someone who'd spent a lifetime working with delicate machinery. He wore standard prisoner work clothes, denim pants, and a gray shirt with PW stenciled on the back. His face was intent, focused, the way a surgeon looks during a critical procedure. The radio had been broken for 3 days. Not just broken, destroyed. A lightning strike during the massive thunderstorm on August 12th had sent a power surge through the camp's electrical system, frying the shortwave receiver that the Army used to monitor international broadcasts. The camp commander had requested a replacement from Denver, but wartime supply chains moved slowly. The radio wouldn't arrive for at least a week, which meant that when the announcement came, the announcement everyone was waiting for, the one about Japan's surrender, Camp Carson wouldn't hear it. They'd have to wait for telephone confirmation, for official dispatches, for news that would arrive hours late through channels that were already overloaded with the chaos of war's ending, unless Fujimoto could fix it. Reeves watched him work and felt the weight of about 15 violations of military protocol pressing on his shoulders. POWs weren't supposed to handle communications equipment. They weren't supposed to be unsupervised in secure facilities. They definitely weren't supposed to be given tools that could be used to build transmitters or sabotage equipment. But Fujimoto was their only chance, and Reeves had made a choice that could end his career or change everything. The question was, would the radio work before the announcement came? And if it did, what would it mean to hear Japan's surrender from the hands of a Japanese prisoner? Kenzo Fujimoto had never intended to be a soldier. He'd certainly never intended to be a prisoner of war in Colorado, fixing American military equipment while his country collapsed. Born in 1913 in Yokohama, he'd been the oldest son of a merchant family that sold imported radios and phonographs. His father had recognized early that radio was the future. In the 1920s, when most Japanese households had never seen electric lighting, Fujimoto's father had been selling crystal radio sets to wealthy families in Tokyo and Yokohama. Kenzo had grown up surrounded by electronics. By age 12, he could repair any radio his father sold. By 16, he was designing his own circuits, experimenting with shortwave receivers, teaching himself English from American radio magazines. He'd wanted to study electrical engineering at university, but his family couldn't afford the tuition. Instead, he'd worked in his father's shop, becoming one of the best radio technicians in Yokohama. He'd also been drafted in 1937 at age 24, assigned to the Imperial Japanese Navy's Communications Corps. Not as a combat sailor, as a radio operator and technician. He'd spent 4 years on various ships and land bases, maintaining communications equipment, training other operators, occasionally jury-rigging repairs when proper parts weren't available. He'd been captured in the Philippines in 1942 during the American recapture of Manila. His communications unit had been overrun by advancing American forces. Unlike many Japanese soldiers who fought to the death, Fujimoto had been trapped in a basement radio room when the building collapsed from artillery fire. American engineers had dug him out 3 days later, dehydrated and semi-conscious, but alive. The shame of capture had been profound. In Japanese military culture, surrender was unthinkable. His family would be told he'd died. He'd never be able to return to Japan with honor. He was, by the standards of his culture and training, already dead. But he was also pragmatic. His father had taught him to value function over pride, results over ritual. A radio either works or it doesn't, his father used to say. It doesn't care about your feelings. So Fujimoto had survived. He'd been processed through the POW system, eventually shipped to the United States in 1943, assigned to Camp Carson, a facility that housed approximately 2,400 German and Italian prisoners, and about 180 Japanese prisoners kept in a separate compound due to security concerns and cultural tensions. Camp Carson was located just outside Colorado Springs, in the shadow of Pikes Peak. It was high desert terrain, dry, cold in winter, scorching in summer, so different from humid Yokohama that Fujimoto sometimes felt like he was on another planet. The prisoners worked various jobs: agricultural labor, construction, maintenance. The camp operated a small furniture workshop where prisoners built chairs and tables for military facilities. Fujimoto had been assigned to the maintenance crew. His electrical skills had been noted during processing, and the camp had use for someone who could repair equipment. He'd fixed everything from kitchen appliances to truck batteries, working quietly, efficiently, never calling attention to himself. He'd been a model prisoner, cooperative, competent, carefully neutral in the complex politics of the Japanese prisoner compound, where some men clung desperately to militaristic pride, while others, like Fujimoto, simply tried to survive with dignity. The guards had gradually come to trust him. Not completely. He was still the enemy, still required supervision, still subject to strict regulations, but enough that when something needed fixing, they'd call for the Jap who knows electronics. Corporal Daniel Reeves had been one of those guards. 25 years old, from a small town in Indiana, he'd been assigned to Camp Carson after being wounded in North Africa, shrapnel in his shoulder, permanent limited mobility, reassigned to stateside duty. He'd expected to hate the Japanese prisoners. His cousin had died at Guadalcanal. Every propaganda poster told him these men were subhuman monsters. Instead, he'd found Fujimoto fixing the camp's water heater, diagnosing the problem through observation and intuition, explaining in halting English what needed to be replaced. Reeves had watched him work with the focused intensity of someone who cared about doing things correctly. Over the next 2 years, they'd developed something that wasn't quite friendship, but wasn't simple guard-prisoner relationship either. Reeves would supervise Fujimoto's repair work. They'd talk, in fragmented conversations bridging language barriers, about mechanical things mostly. How radios worked, why certain designs failed, the difference between American and Japanese electrical standards. Fujimoto had shown Reeves photographs once, kept in his prisoner belongings, carefully preserved, of his father's shop in Yokohama. Shelves full of radios, a young Kenzo standing proudly next to a shortwave receiver, his father smiling, hand on his son's shoulder. Before war, Fujimoto had said simply, "Different life. You miss it?" Reeves had asked. "Every day, but cannot go back. I am dead man in Japan. Family think I die in Manila. Better they think this." That conversation had happened 6 months ago. Now it was August 15th, 1945, and the war was ending. Japan was about to surrender, and the one piece of equipment that could let Camp Carson hear the announcement was broken. Reeves had gone to Major Harrison, the camp commander, on August 13th. Sir, I know someone who can fix the radio. The replacement is coming from Denver. Sir, with respect, it might not arrive in time. If the Japanese surrender announcement comes through while we're deaf, we'll miss it. But Fujimoto can fix it. I've seen him repair more complicated equipment. Fujimoto? The Japanese POW? Yes, sir. Best electronics tech I've ever seen. Major Harrison had been silent for a long moment. Corporal, you understand what you're asking. We'd be giving an enemy prisoner access to communications equipment. If he sabotages it, if he tries to build a transmitter, if command finds out. He won't, sir. He just wants to fix things. It's what he does. This could end both our careers. Yes, sir. But it could also let us hear history happen in real time, instead of reading about it in a memo 6 hours later. Harrison had made the same calculation Reeves had. The value of the moment outweighed the risk. Supervised at all times. If he touches anything he shouldn't, if he does anything suspicious, you shut it down immediately. Clear? Clear, sir. Now it was 3 days later, and Fujimoto was elbow-deep in the radio's chassis, tracing circuits with a pencil, making notes in a mixture of English and Japanese characters. August 1945 was the strangest month of the entire war, a moment suspended between certain victory and uncertain peace. The atomic bombs had fallen. Hiroshima on August 6th, Nagasaki on August 9th. The world had entered the nuclear age with 2 blinding flashes and approximately 200,000 deaths. The numbers were still unclear, the full devastation still emerging, but everyone understood that warfare had fundamentally changed. Japan's position was hopeless. The Soviet Union had declared war on August 9th, invading Manchuria with overwhelming force. American bombers had destroyed most of Japan's major cities through conventional firebombing campaigns. The naval blockade had strangled supply lines. Food was scarce. Industry had collapsed. The military was preparing for a final, suicidal defense of the home islands. But Japan hadn't surrendered yet. American planners were preparing for Operation Downfall, the invasion of Japan, scheduled to begin November 1st. Casualty estimates ranged from 500,000 to over 1 million Allied deaths. Every day without surrender meant more preparation, more resources committed, more American mothers receiving telegrams about training accidents or aircraft crashes. The world waited. Radio networks maintained around-the-clock monitoring of Japanese broadcasts. Diplomats worked through Swiss intermediaries. Military forces remained on highest alert. Everyone knew the announcement would come soon. The question was, when? At Camp Carson, the waiting had a peculiar quality. The German and Italian prisoners had already experienced their nation's defeats. They'd processed surrender, accepted it, moved into a strange post-war limbo of waiting for repatriation. Some were relieved, some were bitter. Most were simply exhausted. The Japanese prisoners were different. Surrender was still theoretical, unimaginable. Many believed the reports of atomic bombs were propaganda. Some clung to fantasies of final victory through sheer willpower. Others, like Fujimoto, could read the writing on the wall, but didn't know how to process what it meant. For the American Guards, Japan's imminent surrender meant the war was truly over. No more casualties, no more sacrifice. The boys in the Pacific could come home. But it also meant dealing with the reality that many of these prisoners they'd guarded for years would soon return to a defeated, devastated homeland. Reeves had asked Fujimoto once, back in July, "What will you do when the war ends?" Fujimoto had been quiet for a long time. Then, "I do not know. Japan will not want me. I am surrender man. Shame. Family think I am dead. Better I stay dead. You could emigrate, stay in America, start over. And do what? Fix radios in country that bomb my city? Work for people who kill my family, maybe? No. I am man without country, man without purpose. It was the most despair Reeves had ever heard in Fujimoto's voice. Now, 3 days after that conversation, Fujimoto was fixing the radio that would announce his country's defeat. And Reeves couldn't tell if that was cruel irony or poetic justice or just the random chaos of war. The shortwave receiver was an ANGRR-2, a military-grade communications set designed for monitoring international broadcasts. It was sophisticated equipment, 12 tubes, 3 frequency bands, capable of pulling in signals from halfway around the world when working properly. The lightning strike had fried 4 tubes and blown out the power supply transformer. That alone would have been fixable with replacement parts. But the surge had also damaged the intermediate frequency transformers and possibly the antenna coupling circuit. The radio wasn't just broken. It was systematically destroyed across multiple systems. Fujimoto had started by testing every component methodically. He'd borrowed a basic multimeter from the camp's electrical shop, spent the first day mapping which circuits were dead and which might be salvageable. Problem, he'd told Reeves on August 13th. Need new tubes, need new transformer, maybe need rebuild antenna circuit. Cannot do without parts. What parts specifically? Fujimoto had written a list: 4 Type 6 SJ7 tubes, 1 power transformer rated for 320 volts, assorted capacitors and resistors. Standard components, but not readily available at a military POW camp in the middle of Colorado. Reeves had scrounged. The camp's supply officer had found 2 appropriate tubes in storage. The motor pool sergeant had donated a transformer from a junked generator that might work with modification. The rest came from cannibalized equipment: an old civilian radio in the recreation hall, a broken amplifier from the camp's PA system. It wasn't ideal. Some components were slightly wrong specifications, requiring circuit modifications to accommodate. But Fujimoto had worked with less. During the war, on island bases with no supply lines, he'd jury-rigged repairs with salvaged parts from crashed aircraft and captured equipment. Can work, he'd said, examining the mismatched components. Must change circuit, must adapt, but can work. The challenge wasn't just technical, it was temporal. No one knew exactly when the surrender announcement would come. Intelligence reports suggested August 14th or 15th. The Japanese government was in crisis, the emperor preparing to make an unprecedented radio address. But schedules were uncertain, communications slow. If Fujimoto didn't finish the repair before the broadcast, Camp Carson would miss history. He worked 12-hour shifts on August 14th and 15th, Reeves supervising constantly. The repair became something more than just fixing a radio. It was a race against time, a technical problem with geopolitical stakes. On the afternoon of August 15th, Fujimoto had announced, 70% ready, power supply work, tubes, work. But antenna circuit wrong, signal weak, cannot hear Tokyo broadcast, maybe hear San Francisco rebroadcast, but not original. How long to fix the antenna circuit? 6 hours, maybe 8. Need recalculate impedance, rewind coupling coil. The announcement could come any time. Yes, must choose finish quick but poor quality, or finish slow but work correctly. It was the kind of engineering decision Fujimoto understood viscerally. Compromise speed for reliability, or reliability for speed. Both had costs. Reeves had made the call. Do it right. If we miss the announcement, we miss it. But when the radio works, it needs to work perfectly. Fujimoto had nodded, returned to work. Now it was 11:47 p.m. on August 15th. The antenna circuit was being reassembled. components hand-wound to specifications Fujimoto had calculated on scratch paper. The work was meticulous, requiring steady hands and absolute precision. Outside the radio room, the camp was quiet. Most prisoners were asleep. Guards walked their rounds with the particular boredom of men who knew the war was ending, but hadn't received official word yet. Reeves watched Fujimoto solder the final connection on the antenna coupling transformer, watched him test voltage with the multimeter, watched him nod with satisfaction, and carefully reassemble the radio's chassis. "Ready test," Fujimoto said. Reeves plugged in the power cord. The tubes began to glow orange. The radio hummed to life. Fujimoto carefully tuned across the shortwave bands. Static, atmospheric noise. A faint voice speaking Spanish, probably a broadcast from Mexico. More static. Then, clear as a bell, an American announcer from San Francisco, continuing to monitor for official word from Tokyo. The Emperor's recorded address was broadcast at noon Tokyo time, which was 10 p.m. Eastern Time last night, but translation and confirmation are still. Fujimoto and Reeves looked at each other. "Wait," Reeves said. "Last night? The announcement already happened?" "We are late," Fujimoto said quietly. "Japan surrendered yesterday, but we are 12 hours behind in time zone. Recording was broadcast while we work." They'd missed it. Despite everything, despite the rush, despite the perfect repair, they'd missed the actual moment. But then Fujimoto's expression changed. "Wait, if recorded message broadcast at 10 p.m. East Coast time was midnight Mountain Time, 12 hours ago. But Tokyo noon is," he calculated quickly. "American military broadcast from Japan must be on different frequency. Original broadcast, not translation. Still happening, maybe." He spun the dial carefully, hunting through frequencies. More static, a weather report, music. Then, faint but unmistakable, Japanese. The formal court Japanese used for official announcements. The Emperor's voice, thin, distant, speaking words no reigning Japanese emperor had ever spoken before. Fujimoto froze. His hands stopped moving. His face went absolutely still. The broadcast was in the middle of the Emperor's address. The words were formal, archaic, difficult even for native speakers to understand. But Fujimoto understood. He'd heard recordings of the court dialect before. Reeves watched him listen, saw something break behind his eyes, saw him hear his country surrender, his emperor, considered divine, inviolable, acknowledge defeat, and urge acceptance. The broadcast continued for another 2 minutes. Then it ended. Silence. Then the San Francisco announcer again, translating. "The Emperor has announced Japan's acceptance of the Potsdam Declaration. After nearly 4 years in the Pacific, the war is over. Repeat, Japan has surrendered. The war is over." Fujimoto sat very still. Then he carefully turned off the radio, unplugged it, and set down his tools with mechanical precision. "Radio works," he said quietly. "You can hear all frequencies. Tokyo, San Francisco, everywhere. No problem." "Fujimoto, I go back to barracks now. Work is finished." He stood, walked toward the door. Reeves caught his arm. "Wait. I'm sorry. I know this must be..." Fujimoto looked at him directly for the first time since the broadcast. His eyes were wet, but his voice was steady. "I fix radio so Americans can hear Japan surrender. This is strange thing, yes? Enemy help, enemy. Hear own defeat. But radio does not care who wins war. Radio only care if circuit works. My father teach me this. Make thing work correctly. This is honor that remains when all other honor is gone." He bowed slightly. Not the prisoner's bow of deference, but the Japanese bow of respect between equals. "Thank you for trust, Corporal Reeves. was honor to fix radio with you. Then he left, walking back toward the Japanese prisoner compound, in the dark. Reeves stood alone in the radio room, listening to celebrations begin to erupt across the camp as word spread, and realized he'd just witnessed something he'd never be able to fully explain. An enemy helping his captors hear his own country's surrender, because fixing things correctly mattered more than pride. August 16th, 1945. 6:15 in the morning. Camp Carson woke to a world transformed. The war was over. Guards and administrators moved through the morning with the dazed quality of people processing the impossible. No more combat, no more casualties, no more telegrams to mothers. The German and Italian prisoners celebrated cautiously, aware their countries had been defeated months ago, but relieved the killing had finally stopped everywhere. The Japanese compound was silent. Reeves found Fujimoto sitting outside his barracks, staring at Pikes Peak in the distance. The mountain was lit by early sun, snow-capped even in August, indifferent to human affairs. "You didn't sleep," Reeves said. "No, cannot sleep. Keep hearing Emperor's voice. Never thought I would hear this. Emperor never speak to common people. But yesterday, he speak to all of Japan. Tell us we lose. Tell us accept defeat." What did he actually say? The English translation was pretty vague. Fujimoto was quiet for a moment, organizing thoughts in a foreign language. He say we must endure the unendurable and suffer what is insufferable. He say we must work for peace, rebuild. He not say surrender. He not say defeat. He use, how do you say, words that mean these things without saying directly. That must have been hard to hear. Hard. Fujimoto laughed without humor. Is impossible to hear. Everything I know about duty, honor, service to Emperor, all say we must die before surrender. But Emperor say surrender. So now, what is duty? What is honor? If Emperor say unendurable must be endured, then everything I believe is wrong or right? I do not know. Major Harrison appeared, looking tired, but purposeful. "Corporal Reeves, Mr. Fujimoto, I need to speak with you both." They followed him to the administration building, to his office where the repaired radio sat on a desk, still tuned to the frequency where they'd heard the Emperor's broadcast. "Mr. Fujimoto," Harrison began, "I need to understand what you did to this radio. We're required to file a report on any prisoner interaction with communications equipment. I need technical documentation." Fujimoto nodded, pulled out the notes he'd made, pages of circuit diagrams, calculations, modifications. He walked Harrison through every change, explained every adaptation, demonstrated that he'd only repaired the receiver, hadn't built any transmission capability, hadn't accessed any classified frequencies. Harrison studied the documentation carefully. "This is professional level work. Where did you learn this?" "My father's shop in Yokohama. We sell radio. I learn repair since child. Then Navy. I work as radio technician 8 years. And now you've fixed our equipment so we could hear your own country's surrender." "Yes, sir. This is strange, I know. But Corporal Reeves asked me to fix. I am prisoner. Prisoner must do work when asked. Also," he hesitated, "also I am technician. Radio is broken. This is wrong. Fix broken thing. This is right. Does not matter who. Win war. Broken thing should be fixed." Harrison sat back in his chair. "Mr. Fujimoto, what you did violated about a dozen regulations. By rights, I should put you in disciplinary isolation and possibly refer this for court-martial." Fujimoto bowed his head. "I understand, sir. I accept punishment. However, the war is over. These regulations were wartime security measures. More importantly, you had multiple opportunities to sabotage this equipment, to build a transmitter, to communicate with enemy forces. You did none of those things. You simply fixed a radio so we could monitor public broadcasts. Is that correct? Yes, sir. I only make repair. Nothing else. Harrison looked at Reeves. Corporal, your assessment? Sir, Fujimoto never did anything suspicious, never tried to access restricted materials, never asked about classified information. He just wanted to fix the radio correctly. I supervised the entire time. I'd stake my career on his integrity. You did stake your career on it. So did I. Harrison pulled out a form. I'm filing a report that says prisoner labor was used for routine maintenance and repair under guard supervision. Technical details will be documented for the record. No disciplinary action warranted. We're also noting that this repair allowed Camp Carson to monitor the Japanese surrender announcement in real time, which contributed to camp security and morale. Does that work for everyone? Reeves felt relief wash over him. Yes, sir. Fujimoto looked confused. No punishment? No punishment. You did good work, in fact. Harrison pulled out another document. I'm also recommending you for the camp's outstanding service recognition. It's normally for guards, but regulations allow for prisoner citations in exceptional circumstances. You'll receive a formal acknowledgement and a small monetary bonus, $20 in camp script. Fujimoto stared. You give me award? For fixing radio? For professional competence and exceptional service? Yes. After they left Harrison's office, Fujimoto turned to Reeves. I do not understand this. In Japan, I am shame for surrender. Here, I get award for help enemy. Nothing makes sense anymore. War's over. Things are going to stop making sense for a while. For everyone. Over the next 3 weeks, as the machinery of peace began grinding into motion, something unexpected happened at Camp Carson. The walls between guards and prisoners began to dissolve. Not completely. The compounds remained separate. Security protocols continued. The Japanese prisoners were still considered higher risk than German or Italian prisoners. But the urgency was gone. The fear was gone. The enemy was just men waiting to go home. The radio that Fujimoto had repaired became the camp's center. Every evening, guards and prisoners gathered around it, separately, but listening to the same broadcasts. Reports from Japan about the occupation, news about war crime trials, stories about rebuilding, about soldiers coming home, about a world trying to figure out what peace looked like. Fujimoto was transferred from general labor to the camp's maintenance department. His electrical skills were too valuable to waste on agriculture. He spent his days repairing equipment, everything from kitchen appliances to the camp commander's personal radio that had stopped working. He worked quietly, professionally, still maintaining the careful distance of a prisoner who knew his place. But guards started seeking him out, not just for repairs, but for advice. The motor pool sergeant asked him about engine electrical systems. The supply officer wanted to understand how to properly store electronic components. The chaplain's assistant needed help setting up a PA system for services. Each interaction was small, professional, bounded by regulations and cultural barriers. But collectively, they added up to something. Fujimoto was being seen as a person with expertise, not just an enemy with a skill. Reeves watched this transformation with mixed feelings. Pride that he'd been right about Fujimoto's character. Discomfort that it had taken the war's end for people to see Japanese prisoners as human. And something else. A growing awareness that when Fujimoto was repatriated to Japan, he'd be returning to a country that considered him dead and shameful. In early September, as leaves began turning on the aspens around Camp Carson, Reeves asked Fujimoto, Have you thought about what you'll do when you go back? Fujimoto was rewinding a transformer, his hands moving with practiced precision. I think about this every day, but no answer. Japan is destroyed. My city may be destroyed. My family may be dead. Even if they live, I cannot return to them. I am surrender man. Shame. What if you didn't go back? Fujimoto's hands stopped. What you mean? What if you stayed in America, applied for asylum or refugee status? There's going to be programs for displaced people. You could stay, work as a technician, start over. Start over as what? As Japanese man in America? Country that bombed my city. Country that put Japanese Americans in camps. You think they want me? I don't know what they want, but I know you're a hell of an electrician, and the world's going to need electricians. Might be easier to build a new life here than return to a place where you're considered dead. Fujimoto set down his tools. You are kind to think this, Corporal Reeves, but you do not understand. I am Japanese. This is not just nationality, is identity. Everything I know, everything I am, come from Japan. Language, culture, way of thinking. If I stay in America, I am forever stranger, forever man without place. Better to be dead man in my own country than stranger in foreign country. You'd rather die than start over? Not die, but accept that part of me already dead. Honor demands this. Duty demands this. I cannot change who I am just because war is over. It was the most honest conversation they'd ever had. Reeves had no answer that didn't feel hollow. September the 2nd, 1945. The formal surrender ceremony aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. Major Harrison had arranged for the repaired radio to be moved to the camp's recreation hall. Every guard who could be spared from duty was there. The German and Italian prisoners were allowed to listen, and for the first time, the Japanese prisoners were invited to join. Not required, but invited. Most stayed in their compound. The shame was too great. But Fujimoto came, along with about 20 others who'd decided that witnessing history mattered more than preserving pride. The broadcast came through crystal clear. Fujimoto's repairs had made the radio better than it had been originally. General MacArthur's voice, formal and stern. Japanese officials signing the surrender documents. The ceremony that officially ended the Pacific War. Fujimoto sat in the back of the hall, surrounded by American guards and German prisoners, and listened to his country's final defeat made official. Reeves watched him, saw him sitting perfectly still, face unreadable, hands folded in his lap. When the broadcast ended, there was uncertain silence. Then spontaneous cheering from the Americans, relief, celebration, the joy of survival. The German prisoners applauded politely, understanding that this moment mattered, even though their own war had ended months ago. The Japanese prisoners stood and filed out silently, returning to their compound. Except Fujimoto. He approached the radio, ran his hand over the chassis he'd repaired, and said to no one in particular, "Strange thing. This radio here beginning of war at Pearl Harbor. Now here end of war in Tokyo Bay. Radio see everything. Radio remember everything. But radio does not judge. Radio only receive signal and make it heard." Is that how you see yourself? Reeves asked quietly. Just receiving and transmitting, not judging? Perhaps. Technician cannot afford to judge. Must only ask, does it work? Can I fix it? If I spend time judging, this is good signal. This is bad signal. This is enemy frequency. This is friendly frequency. I cannot do my work. Must only make circuit work correctly. But you're not a circuit. You're a person. Fujimoto smiled sadly. Am I? Sometimes I am not sure. War make us all into circuits. Input, orders, processing, duty, output, action. No judgment, no choice. just function. Maybe this is why I am good technician. I already think, like machine. You fixed this radio so Americans could hear your country surrender. That wasn't machine thinking. That was human choice. Was it? Or was it just prisoner doing assigned work? I do not know anymore. Maybe choice and duty look same from outside, even when they feel different inside. It was the most philosophical Fujimoto had ever been, and Reeves realized the war's end had broken something in him. Not his competence or his dignity, but his certainty about who he was and what he believed.